Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Jeremy, for the introductory words. I'll leave you to judge what Jeremy was saying. Has the man turned a little bit green after so many years spent as an economist negotiating international trade? Where I would start by saying that I incredibly enjoyed the day yesterday with all the presentations that again brought facts to the forefront. And my questioning with all these issues, and an issue that I have been working on since I drafted this report, Sustainability Now, is really why, with all the knowledge that we have, why can we still not get the right governance decisions? Why do we continuously do the wrong things that we know are wrong until the next disaster hits us? We do need bloody noses before collectively we start modifying systems, and that doesn't seem to be a very intelligent way of governance. So that's basically where I end, and I will come there. But let's perhaps start with the start. Jeremy has said that I have been in charge of environment, and one of the issues that I had to deal with were the Sustainable Development Goals. I was asked to prepare the European Union position for Rio +20. And it looked as if it was just going to be another multilateral event where we're going to be finger-pointing each other, the South telling the North that all the finance promised in Rio in 1992 had never really shown up, and the North criticizing the South by saying, well, the promise to not cut down the tropical forests had not really been lived up. And we thought that that was not going to be a very helpful event. And so we started to suggest that we should look into green economy to try to change the perception that we grow as economies, we work up our wealth in our societies at the expense of nature. And it's when we become rich and sophisticated, then we start thinking about cleaning up the mess that we have produced in order to get to the wealth that we have enjoyed. Too often, that is still the prevailing way in which on this planet governments, but also a lot of private businesses in very different sectors are looking at these issues. And perhaps it's difficult to tell them that this is unfair, because we in Europe have grown up in this way. And our present wealth, in inverted commas, has been achieved at tremendous environmental and also social cost. So talking about this in Rio +20 seemed to us to make a lot of sense. It was not welcomed in the beginning, but eventually we had a number of developing countries in Latin America, Colombia, one that very early came on and supported the idea, and they framed this notion of Sustainable Development Goals. It came together with a review of the Millennium Development Goals that had to be reviewed, and that had not really contained any substance on environment. Out of that process, to my surprise also, I still today am struck by how big an outcome we managed globally, multilaterally to produce in New York. Those 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, really cover the waterfront of what we would need to do to return this planet to its senses and to have a future for people, but for nature also, and for animals who play such an important role, as we have heard yesterday also all through the day. So we then, when we had identified those 17 goals, we as Europeans insisted that this should be changed from the Millennium Development Goals that were available only for the developing countries, or that were relevant only for the developing countries, and make them universally applicable. And from this universal application, eventually grew the question on the European Union, who had subscribed these SDGs. Well, what do you do with your policies? Where do you stand? Do you think that your policies are sustainable, are in line with these SDGs? And that's when I was asked, having left my job as Director General for Environment, I was asked to draft this report that Jeremy referred to, which I called Sustainability Now. I started by pointing out the obvious facts that you all have heard yesterday in much more length than I could address them in my little report. So I don't want to repeat the facts that are very well known here. We are living above our share of the planet in Europe. Collectively, we're living above the supporting capability of this blue planet, and we're doing it while we know that this is the only planet we have. So it's a fundamental contradiction. It's short-termism in the worst form that we can imagine. And so when I started looking at this, I had to explain that sustainability, what is sustainability? Sustainability, to me, has three elements, three key pillars. It's economic reasoning, it has social elements, it has environmental elements and aspects, and we need to bring these three together. If we just look for environment and clean and healthy environment, and we don't look into social consequences of what we may do in order to get to clean environment, it's very unlikely that these policies will last, because people will start to fight back. If we privilege the economy and social elements at the expense of the environment, we know that the environment and the planet is going to fight back. So we need to bring these things together. And at some point in time, I said that for Europe, having found peace among nations in the last 70 years, it's time to find peace with nature and peace at the social front, social peace. In my report, I come up with, again, a number of facts that show that our different policies are not sustainable as they are defined today. I have looked at a selection of policies in this report. Can't talk about all of them. I will focus on agriculture. In the agricultural area, I think we can very easily see that there isn't much sustainability in the way in which we organize our agro-food sector for the moment. It doesn't seem to me to make a lot of economic sense, neither social nor certainly environmental. We have every evidence that biodiversity in agriculturally used land in Europe is faring worse than in any other parts. We have bees who live better in cities than in agriculturally used land, etc. So the examples are manifold that the way in which we produce for the moment is not supportive, is not taking sufficiently into account our environmental needs. But it doesn't take our social needs into account, Because when I look at farm incomes, and when I look away from the averages in which we tend to reason, we see that this policy is introducing more and more inequality among the farming communities. We have those large industrial farms who are reaping most of the revenue from this farm policy, and we have small holdings that barely survive. We have created a vicious circle by which we tell farmers that they have to invest more and more in nutrients, in pesticides, in machinery, in order to produce more products that they will sell at lower price, and therefore having difficulties in coming up to paying for the indebtedness that we have introduced them in the first place. They're beginning to be hamsters constantly running behind this efficiency drive that we have introduced. And many of them drop out. We're losing farms, we're losing farmers. So on the social side, that can't be the objective of a sustainable policy. Economically, we're producing in this sector food that more and more people are becoming wary of or suspicious. We've heard about the pesticide problems in food. We've heard about antibiotics in food. We are beginning to be aware as consumers that this sector is producing stuff cheaply, but not necessarily healthily. What we need to do on top of it is to look at holistic sectors. We can't just look at what the farm produces. We have to look at what happens to the farm produce in the food sector. Sugar itself is not unhealthy, but the amounts of sugar we find in our yogurts, in our Cokes, in our drinks, are unhealthy and are leading to obesity, to cardiovascular diseases in our population. And we're beginning to see all these things, and the facts are there, and yet we continue. And when I drafted my report, I had in the preparation, but also when it came out, quite aggressive reactions from the farming community. The farming community seems to be the only one that does not see these facts. It's surprising. I know two sectors, and we spoke about both of them yesterday, that seem to have this attitude: farmers and fishermen. Fishermen think that they know how much fish there is in the sea, and there is no bureaucrat, no scientist who can tell them that these stocks are overfished and that they will disappear if they continue in this way. They know, because they've done it for hundreds of years. We need to come back to looking at the facts. The facts are that 75% of our fish stocks in this planet are overfished, and that therefore we cannot get the harvests that we could get if these stocks were healthy. And the same is true for farming. I have farmers who will very, very aggressively argue that they take care of the land because it's theirs and they have long-term approaches. But they can't convince me, and I think they can't convince any scientific assessment that the soil quality is not going down in Europe, that we're losing biodiversity in Europe faster than ever, that our waters are eutrophic, i.e. they carry too many nutrients which come out of agriculture. If you take a map and you put water quality or the lack of it together with large animal production, you'll find a perfect match. If you want to know where do we produce factory farmed meat or milk, just look at the water pollution in Europe. You have an immediate idea of where this is happening. So I tried to look into solutions to all these issues, and there are surprising things happening. In the European agricultural sector, the only part that is growing in terms of land used, in terms of employment, in terms of numbers of farms, is the organic sector. The other traditional sector continues to lose farms and farmers, but the organic is having an answer to the social element of sustainability. Here we begin to see that income is possible with a different way of producing. I've highlighted an example that the agro industry really doesn't like at all. A large Italian pasta producer has made a deal with a number of durum wheat producers by telling them that use 20% less pesticides, use 20% less fertilizers, and I'll buy the outcome that you produce. And when they started, both in Italy, but in India, in different places in the world, they found out that we're having 20% more yields by doing this. That's totally contrary the collective wisdom. Using less pesticides and less fertilizer and having more outcome, how is it possible? The answer seems to be, and I'm not a scientist, I'm just an economist, but the answer seems to be that while these cereals are wind polluted, when insects come on top and pollinate also, sorry, big mistake, pollinate. When insects also pollinate, these crops have higher returns, which leads to better income for the farmers that are working on this basis, and which to me begins to meet the three corners of sustainability. So together with two commissioners, Ciolos and Potočnik, 5 years ago, we tried to green the CAP. And we had some useful ideas of shifting the money away from acreage and efficiency and quantity of product towards quality. And these ideas were completely turned upside down in Council of Ministers and European Parliament. So we're coming back to the governance issue. And that's, for me, the big question, also big question for you. You are convinced, and we've talked yesterday a lot about what you can do as individual consumers. Individual consumers, when we ask them in Europe, in their 75–80% say that they would be buying fair, organic, bio, healthy products. When I look into the marketplace, those 75–80% shrink to 5 or 6%. It has made me think that consumers, European consumers, may be Catholics, going to Mass on Sunday to be sinners for the rest of the week. So if we want to just rely on consumer attitudes to change the system, I'm afraid we will not do justice to the urgency that we're hearing from planet Earth. We need urgently to change the system. And in our democracies, that requires us all to think of where we make every 4 years or every regional, local elections, where do we make our little crosses? Because in our systems, it's elected people who eventually make the decisions. And if we make those crosses in the wrong place, then we will continue to have the wrong policies. Thank you very much.